Hello, everybody. I'm just recording this video to go over some of the things that I would like to encourage you to start doing from this week. Um, we did have a good meeting last night. I didn't record it because we only have 2 attendants, and um, it just didn't go as it was planned. The structure was not really a way that I felt like um, would be a beneficial process to record it. So I'm just recording to go over some of the main ideas and points that we discussed, and some things that you need to get done from now towards the end of the semester. Um, a couple of good ideas that came up. Yesterday, Bree had asked a nice question or good question that she was kind of concerned knowing that how many vocabulary students learn in every year early on in preschool or when they're younger. She had shared the concern that as a ESL teacher who doesn't know another second language, she didn't know how much she can contribute to the students' learning of Spanish, for example, or that other mother tongue that they have. And this was a good idea or concern to come up because that's one of those areas where you need to have social awareness of what is the need for your students and what you can do and what you should be doing. So a lot of time as an ESL teacher, as the ESL stands for English as a second language, you're either teaching English as a second or foreign language to your students. It is considered second language when the student is learning English kind of along with another language that is their mother tongue around the same time. So when they're very young. When they become a little older, after like 7, 8, or 9 years old, then that mostly become more of a foreign language than a second language. So these terms are used sometimes one for another. But knowing what you can do to actually benefit your students. Now, there are different models that are used in the schools. There's one model, the ELL or ESL model, that is used that two languages are taught, two languages are used to teach the content and the language to the students. So, for example, in Denver, Colorado, some schools are bilingual schools. So if you're teaching in a bilingual school, you most probably are required to be proficient in one or the other language. So one of those languages is your English, and one of the others is going to be another foreign language that is a focus in that school. In fact, in Waterloo, Iowa, now we have a few bilingual schools too, who would be teaching French and Spanish or Spanish. And the way that works is when the school is bilingual, there are some content that are also taught in that second language or so both of the languages, English and another language, are focused equally as important. Some of the content taught in one or the other language, a lot of time the content is taught in both language. So you have math taught in Spanish and English, and you have literacy taught in both languages. So there is so much focus in both of the languages. But a lot of time in the kind of schools that we tend to be teaching, the focus is on getting the students who are not speaker of the English up to speed with the English that they need to know to also be able to teach them the content let's say math, science, or whatever else that they're learning in English language. So a lot of time you are focusing on not only the vocabulary that they need to know because of their age, because of the communication skills that they need, but also the vocabulary that they need to know for learning a different content. So that's one thing to remember, that your focus is right now on teaching English to the students of to students who are speaking other languages and are learning English, and they need to get up to speed to be able to learn those other content in the classroom alongside of their peers, because most of the schools are using English for the majority of the content that is taught at our schools in United States. Now, one of the things that I recommend to my students to consider telling the parents of the ESL students is to not to worry about teaching too much of English or focusing too much on English and forgetting about the mother tongue, because some people try to make sure that their student or their kid is getting up to speed with English faster, and so they start speaking English with their kid. One problem that can come from that approach is a lot of time the families who are not native speaker of English, like myself, some of us are able to have discussion about some more difficult topics, but some people may not have that education to be able to have discussions on more difficult or more complicated topic with their kids when they're becoming teenagers, when they're going off to the college level. So knowing that that can cause a future gap in the communication between the parent and the kid, it's good to encourage the parent to continue speaking that first language or mother tongue with their kid, and also to teach them how to read and write in that language. Because even though you may know one or two languages, you may not know the mother tongue of all the students who are attending your class. So that's one of the areas that is good to consider recommending to the parents. And it depends on the situation whether you want to share the reason for that, so that they have a choice whether they want to continue speaking English to their kid, or they would rather make sure that the kid is also learning that mother tongue. Because as a kid, the ESL kid is spending most of their time at school. So there is so much exposure to English language when they're living in the US. And when they go home, if they're not spending enough time speaking about the different issues in that mother tongue with their family, there is sometimes that there is that frustration with that mother tongue, or that laziness to continue learning or to continue trying to have more difficult discussions in that language that happens. And then slowly, because they're not learning how to write or read, their knowledge of that language remains so limited. The number of vocabulary that they learn in that mother tongue is become so limited, and they may not learn that language. So as an ESL teacher, this is what I'm going to recommend to you, that first of all, try to focus on improving your own English proficiency. Try to make sure that you're improving your own grammar. Try to use right punctuation, because you're teaching that in the writing, you're teaching that to the kids. And if you're making mistake, you're basically teaching that mistake, and that mistake becomes fossilized in the kids' brain. They learn it the wrong way. So try to make sure that you're focused on improving your own English language, awareness of how the language works, awareness of the appropriate vocabulary in the different social contexts. And this is one of those things that in the sociolinguistic class, you're learning a little bit more about how to learn those code switching, how to learn those using the appropriate language in the different contexts. So, for example, the language that the kid or the ESL learner need to use when they're talking with a colleague compared to a language that they will use when talking to a friend or a roommate. So those are all different aspects that you need to be aware of, and you need to be able to help your student. One of the other questions that was discussed last night was Emily's very good question and point about all these different assessments that you're learning about, the different assessment methods that you're learning about, and all these different names that they have, and when do we get to use them. So with that, it is I cannot tell you that you will be using this assessment exactly at this kind of situation. It's good to learn these methods. It's good to have that in your bucket as a teacher to be able to pull it off when you're working with specific goal in mind. You know that, for example, my students need to be able to use these kind of vocabulary to have a good communication with their friends for making friend purpose. So this is what I'm going to use. So trying to modify and use these methods as you're learning, kind of think about these methods and also the methodologies that you'll be learning in another class, trying to keep these in mind, remembering what they were, being aware of the language that is used in the assessment area. It's just some tools that you're basically earning. It's not necessarily that you'll be using this or that in this setting, but it's more like giving you that tool to know where to pull it off when you need to. And that's going to depend on the students that you will be working with, the school that you will be working in, number of students that you have, and what is most appropriate for the age that you're working with. So just keep that in mind. Try to make a good repository of that. And this is one of the other things that we discussed last night, that what if we create a repository like a Google Drive, a shared drive, that we all throw in some of those good methods or tools that we can use, or something that would help us to increase our empathy for our students or understanding of what our students need. So I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but something that is now important to focus on for the rest of this week is you need to start working on a mini research, and that mini research is preferably need to be on the assessment issues or anything related to assessment, in preferably K through 12 or P through 12 in United States schools. Now, it's okay if you decide to focus on assessment of ESL learners in other countries as well, because a lot of time you will find some resources that has some focus on that, because you also may be teaching English as a foreign language in a different country. But try to focus on articles, the peer-reviewed articles that are focused on assessment. So you can use different keywords, but this is one of those things that I decided to use assessment in ESL in United States. This is just very general. I can modify this. I can change this to assessment of ESL in preschool, assessment of ESL in high school. So depending on what you think you're going to be, what the content, the context that you'll be working in, modify those keywords, and then try to still stay focused on the assessment. I know you are eager to learn more about the methodologies that you're going to be using in the classroom, and a lot of what you're learning is applicable to the real life situation, but just make sure that you're more focused on assessment than other cultural competence or methods. So what you need to do from now to the end of the semester is you need to find one article on every week and try to summarize that, try to get out what's some new information that you can take out of that you can use in the future teaching or assessment that you will be implementing in your classroom. So you're not really reporting to me on every week basis, but you're breaking down a 4 or 5 resource paper into 3 or 4 weeks. Starting from this week, it will be 4 weeks before the semester ends. So you will be finding one article every week, and that makes your final project go very smooth if you summarize and write a little bit of what you gathered from each article every week. Try to stay focused on the same or similar topic, because when you're writing it in a mini paper or mini research format, you want to stay focused on that same topic that you were focusing on. So just try to make sure that the 4 or 5 articles that you find in this next few weeks are more relevant to one subject. And one of the reasons that I want you to do this is coming up this next winter, some of you are taking the pedagogy class where you're learning the methods class where you're learning the pedagogy and teaching methods in ESL. And doing the research for that class and this class together, you can put together a very nice presentation to present in some conferences, potentially in Iowa, in Hawaii, in Denver, or other places, some international conferences that accept student presentations. And also you can start with Rice Day, present part of your research. So I'm hoping that you can put together at least 5 of those resources that you can find in a future research that you can put together as you're working on your method class. So each week you need to find one article that is peer-reviewed. The topic, it's open-ended depending on what you are going to be focused on. Try to stay focused on the assessment of ESL, but the age level or the kind of content that is assessed is up to you, that what you're going to focus on. So if you're going to focus on assessment of vocabulary, if you're going to stay focused on assessment of ESL learning in high school, or the differentiation or the problems of the standardized testing and assessment in ESL. So, for example, the problems that are reported when taking TOEFL or IELTS test. Another recommendation that I had for all of you is to take a sample IELTS test. IELTS is something like an English proficiency test that anyone coming to United States to work or study have to take this test to show that they have the minimum proficiency. So they have to target for certain points. The total point for IELTS is 9, and there are 4 skills that are being tested during the test, and then there is one skill, that the speaking test, that is conducted separately. The reason that I'd like to encourage you to take an example or practice test of IELTS or TOEFL is, if you take one of these tests, then when you're reading about these different skills, English skills that are taught differently, it makes more sense that why we are assessing them separate, or why we are focused on specific proficiencies when we're teaching these skills to our students, and depending on what they're going to be using that score, why one skill may be more important than the others. So I just did a quick search in Google just to see if I can find some free IELTS practice tests. It looks like there are a lot of them. Something that I kind of liked was, one of them was the IELTS practice test. It was just right from the IELTS website itself. When you go there, it does have the listening, reading, general training. This is for those who want to take an IELTS test for coming to US to work. And then academic writing, general training, writing, speaking. So the general training ones are for those who want to work. Academic writing and speaking are for those who want to, or academic reading are for those who are going to come to US for studying in higher ed institutions. So for example, for a bachelor's or master's degree. The way that the test is formatted is just like a lot of other standardized tests, is sometimes complicated. So even as a native speaker, if you take these tests, sometimes you realize that, oh, I actually missed on some of these proficiencies, while I think I should be doing a lot better. So that's why I want you to take a little time, because we are focused on the assessment of ESL. I just want you to take a little time to take one of these tests, just to make yourself familiar with what this process looks like to someone who is taking this test, and they need to get an overall grade point of 6 or 7 for like academic reason. A lot of time the minimum is 6.5 or 7, or for a certain major it has to be 7.5 or 8. And it is competitive when they apply for different academic majors. So try to take a little time, if you can, sometimes this week or next week, to take one of these practice. This is another one. And this test is going to take at least 3 hours or 2.5 hours, because separating the speaking, they have the speaking practice test. The speaking is always conducted with an actual person interviewing the person who's taking this test, but it still is nice to look at some of the samples that are available. And when you go through that, when you click on the listening, you see that there are 4 sections. Those 4 sections are actually 4 sections of one test. So when you start that, you need to make sure that you're clicking on every one of these and completing answering all of those questions, and then moving on to the next step, which is your reading practice. The reading comes with 2 of those readings. You have to, as an academic major, you have to do all of the 2 or the 3 readings that are provided for you. One of them is more complicated and one of them is more general. And then there is a writing that is, again, most of the time 2 paper that you have to write, or 2 essay that you have to write, and you will be given a topic to practice. So whenever you can, secure like a 2 or 3 hour time to go over the whole test at once. And it tells you that how much you need to kind of give yourself to complete the whole writing or reading tasks. I think going over some of these tests and samples of these tests as a teacher is very important for us. We don't want to be teaching to the test, but we do want to make sure that we are preparing our students for this kind of fluency test or competency test that they need to take. So maybe sometime this week and next week, make sure that you're taking one of these tests. If you have questions about your research, if you'd like to discuss it with me, stop by my office or send me an email. Continue doing the great job you're doing on the discussion board. And let's talk about potential meeting if you're interested and you think that one day in a week is going to work. I was thinking that maybe we don't replace the meeting for the discussion, but maybe we can meet up for a coffee and a little more chat about everything that we are reading and some of our personal experience or some of our questions that we may have. So just shoot me an email, stop by, and have a great rest of the week. Bye-bye.